Diary of an Empath. My next guest is Terri Cole. Terri is a licensed psychotherapist, author, and global leading expert in relationships, boundaries, and personal empowerment. Her no-nonsense approach to therapy has transformed the lives of many, and her work has been featured in media outlets such as the Huffington Post, the New York Times, and Forbes. Terri is also the host of a popular podcast called The Terri Cole Show, where she provides listeners with actionable tips and strategies to create meaningful change in their lives. So in today's episode, we'll be discussing Terri's journey as a therapist, the importance of boundaries in relationships, and how to cultivate self-love and empowerment. So without further ado, let's dive in. Terri, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me, Terris.
I'm super excited. Me and Terri were talking a little bit before the show, and how I stumbled across Terri was through a mutual person who I was on her podcast, Erin, called the Raw Beauty Talks podcast. And Erin had Terri on the show and said that she ended up signing up for her boundaries course and had to highly recommend her for my show. So we got connected that way. Terri, I would love for you to talk a little bit about your journey and how you got into this field and where you're at today.
All right. Well, thanks. Yes, Erin is so sweet.
Yes, I love her. Best energy.
So great. Well, I wasn't always a psychotherapist. I was a talent agent for years before I became a psychotherapist for celebrities and models. I was negotiating contracts for like movies and stuff like that. And I was also simultaneously on my own therapeutic journey. And so that is the thing that really shifted my life, was my own personal experience in therapy. So I started when I was 19. I stopped drinking when I was 21. And I've been in therapy pretty consistently ever since. And I'm not anywhere near 19. So it's been decades. Because part of what I realized in my own therapeutic process was the way that I looked at life before therapy was I was like, okay, well, we're all kind of dealt a hand, right? Like imagine it's a card game and you get these cards. And, part of me thought, all right, we just make the best of the cards we're dealt. And then in therapy, I realized that wasn't my only option, that I could also just decide I didn't like those cards. I didn't like that deck. I didn't like that game. Like I could literally, from the ground up, create a life I loved. And it had nothing to do with what happened previous. That as long as I handled my original injuries and my wounds and my childhood stuff, and I knew I couldn't drink, right? I stopped drinking so young because it was so toxic. And I also started drinking so young. By the time I stopped, I think I started at 11, stopped at 21. I realized that I wouldn't have control over what would happen in my life if I continued drinking. I could just so clearly see. It was like I was sitting on the fence and I saw my life with alcohol on one side. And it was like your basic shit show of like misunderstandings, miscommunication, fighting about stupid shit, like missed opportunities, blah, blah, blah. And then I looked on this side and it was just a blank slate. And I was like, oh, without alcohol, I can actually build a life I love. And that's pretty much exactly what I did. So I was an agent for less than 10 years, maybe 8 years. And the healthier I got, the less I wanted to be in the entertainment business. It was like I realized that probably 3 years before I left, I was just obsessed with helping my clients. I did not care about Pantene. I did not care about a movie deal. I was like, who am I getting into an eating disorder clinic? Who needs a therapist? Who needs to go to Al-Anon? Who needs AA? And that's what I was truly lit up about, was helping them, because what ended up happening for me is that I realized that none of us have to be stuck. It feels like we're stuck, but that there are ways to get yourself unstuck. And I just was like, does everyone know this about therapy? Am I the only person who does not know that if I really understand what's driving my behavior and my choices, if I don't like my behavior and my choices, I can change. that. I can actually heal that original injury that is driving me towards unavailable men or whatever the thing is, because we all have different wounding, that I could stop that behavior. So that's what inspired me to change careers in my early 30s. And I have to say, leaving, I was basically running a bicoastal talent, the New York office of a bicoastal talent agency, and representing every supermodel you've ever heard of. It was the 90s, people. This was a very popular thing that was happening. So, I remember talking to my father and being like, so I'm going to quit my job and go back to school and become a therapist. And he was like, fucking why? He literally was like, his exact words were, sounds weird.
Yeah. Mid-career.
He's like, you're just reaching the pinnacle. And I said, Dad, that's okay, right? It can sound weird to you, but I'm not happy. And that matters to me. And luckily for you, I don't need anything from you. So what I'd like is your support, but I got it. I will take out loans. I'll do it myself. Like, I didn't need him for anything, but I really did want his support, which eventually he was like, okay, if that's what you want to do, you're a grown woman, obviously. Mm-hmm. But that was the shift. And once I went to NYU, got my master's, immediately opened a private practice, and that was 25 years ago.
That's so interesting how it almost like first of all, you did therapy way younger than what most people do, which is amazing because like you, I had a very turbulent, I would say early teens into my teenage years. I started drinking very early. I started experimenting with different drugs. I started being sexually promiscuous at a young age. And mind you, I did not have a very good crowd around me. And so my teens were very turbulent. And similar to you, when I got about 17, 18, I started to realize that I needed to make some changes. Now, I think you probably hit epiphanies a little bit younger than I did, but I ended up going into the Marine Corps, and that helped me get onto that road. And then I had a child. But for me, I started going into a lot of these turbulent, toxic relationships with men who were either highly narcissistic, I would say probably truly NPD, or just very toxic, high highs and low lows. And I found myself having very poor boundaries. And it wasn't until I got into my 30s, I'm 37 now, I would say really in the last 4 to 5 years, particularly in the last 3 years, that I've really cultivated solid boundaries. And that's only because I've become so protective of my peace. I would love to hear from you, even just the basics of why are boundaries important and why do people struggle so much when it comes to boundaries?
All right, so let's establish what they are so that we all have like the same working definition. And this is what they are according to me. I want you to look at your boundaries as your own personal rules of engagement, right? It lets people know what's okay with me and what is not okay with me. Your boundaries are made up of your preferences, your limits, your desires, and your deal breakers, like your non-negotiables. And it's not enough to just know them, which most people don't even know. You have to know them and be able to transparently communicate them. And I feel like therein lies the rub for so many people, knowing what your boundary preferences are and then being able to say them. So let's get into why it's so friggin' hard. Why? Why is it so hard? It's so hard. I wrote an entire book about it. That's how hard it is. Because after being a therapist for so many years, I just kept seeing the same pain over and over and over and over. And I was like, oh my God, no one is teaching anyone about boundaries or codependency or effective communication, and certainly not young. So what happened for most of us is that we were raised and praised for being self-abandoning codependents. This is what we learned to do. The more self-sacrificing, the better. So think about childhood. Think about what was the messaging that most of us got. Be a good girl. If you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. Turn that frown around. Where's my happy girl? Like when you think about what we learned that our feelings, if they were not positive, are not acceptable. We learned to prioritize the feeling states of the people around us, especially the adults in our life in childhood. Now, for some people, if you had a chaotic upbringing or an abusive upbringing, this was a matter of survival, right? And emotionally, for every kid, it's a matter of survival. We don't want to be rejected by the adults in our life. And, think about childhood as like you are the ultimate captive audience, because where the hell are you going?
Right.
Nowhere. You're not like just, thumbing it out of there to like go rent a room somewhere. Like, we have to figure it out. And kids are so adaptive that we learn, how do I not be rejected? How do I not be abused? How do I not get hurt? It may not always work, but we're always working to stay in the good graces of the people who have power over us. And every person's situation is different, but whether your situation was an addicted home, an abusive home, a home that had super high expectations of you, so you end up becoming a perfectionist, where no matter what you do, it feels like it's not good enough. There is so much desire to avoid being rejected that we learn to self-abandon so that we will be accepted, so that we will get positive reinforcement from others. So we leave these childhood homes and we go into our life, but we don't even know that we've been trained this way. We don't even understand what's happening. I mean, until you consciously, like you're saying you did, like I did, we seek to understand why we are the way we are. So all of us were raised, like you and I, everybody listening, you have a downloaded, what I call your downloaded boundary blueprint. And this is in your unconscious mind. It's the paradigms that we were taught. We believe, like, this is how relationships are. This is how the world is. This is how I need to behave to be loved, to be safe, to be accepted, to be worthy. And so until you can bring this unconscious material from the basement, as I like to call it, which is your unconscious mind, to the main part of the house, which is your conscious mind, we don't even know what we're dealing with. We don't even understand our own behavior. We're like, how am I in another relationship with another narcissist, manipulator, unavailable person? How? How am I here again? So where we can look at our life, right? Our life. What are your pain points? That tells us where to look for the original injuries. So if you guys, anybody listening, if you're like, I don't even know about boundaries, I have no idea. Like, I'm so overwhelmed by this conversation, I can't even see straight. Let's do something that's super easy.
Okay.
I want right now, we're all going to take a quick resentment inventory. You're just going to think about how you feel. Who are you holding resentment for right now? And I guarantee you, it would take you exactly 2 minutes, not even, to write down, oh, I feel resentment for my sister because she feels entitled to ask me to watch her kids all the time. I feel resentment for my partner because they spent all this money without consulting me, or they don't talk to me about it, or they don't spend time with me, or whatever. I'm resentful for my parents because they feel they have a key to my house and they just come in anytime they want to. And I'm a grown adult, but they don't seem to treat me that way, or whatever your resentments may be. You may resent people who work for you. You may resent your boss. You may resent your friends. And that's okay. So first of all, don't get all weirded out if like you do a resentment inventory and you're like, wow, what's wrong with me? I have so much resentment. Everyone has resentment. What we care about is who is that resentment for and why? Because once we start identifying those resentments, now we can go, because where you feel resentful, usually a need is going unmet in you. So it's either a boundary has been crossed, either you need to set a boundary, but you haven't, so the other person doesn't even know they're stepping over a boundary that you haven't expressed, or you just feel unseen, or some need, right? You're just not getting your needs met. So that's the beginning. If you feel overwhelmed and you don't know what your boundaries are about, I also have a great quiz that will help you identify what your boundary style is. You just go to it's free. Just go to boundaryquiz.com. Literally, that's the URL, boundaryquiz.com. And I feel like that's a good place for people to start when they're like, I'm trying to identify what my disordered boundary style is, you know?
I love that, and so eloquently put, because some people truly just don't know where to start because there's so much that they're feeling. There's so many things going on, and they might want to change. They might want to improve, but sometimes it's hard to pinpoint where to start. Now, when I hear you talk about boundary styles, are there different styles to boundary setting? And if so, what are they?
Well, there's different styles of disordered boundaries. So we have porous boundaries, which are too loose. They're too malleable. And the way the boundary quiz goes, we have like 7 archetypes. So if you have primarily porous boundaries, you're more of a chameleon or a peacekeeper or a pushover, right? So there's different styles and then I give you a description and a video of each style. Then there's rigid boundaries. And this is when your boundaries are too inflexible. And this can look like, this is like the ice queen or like the loner, where if somebody hurts your feelings, if you have rigid boundaries, you're likely to cut them off, not respond to them, ghost them, give them the silent treatment, more than you are likely to have a conversation with them about how they hurt your feelings.
Mm.
Right. So where I think the myths come in. So anyway, those are the 2 disordered. And then the third style is healthy boundaries. Right. So that's the one in the middle that we're seeking to get to, having healthy boundaries, which looks like being able to assert yourself, but also being flexible. Right. Not too flexible, but it can't just be my way or the highway. And if that is for you, then your boundaries may be rigid, and neither rigid nor porous boundaries create healthy relationships, right? They both create pain for you in the end. So it's really in your best interest to figure out how to have healthy boundaries. And you don't have to figure it out because I wrote a whole book on it. You could just get the book. You know what I mean? Like, honestly, I literally walk you through. It's not a book that you can just pick up and be like, I'm going to get some wisdom on page 200. You're not. You're going to start from the beginning and you're going to go through it very methodically, because that's the way that I teach it. We build, like once you start getting some skills, right? We don't even get to scripts until the end of the book, because you have to go in first. It's not about the other people, right? It's about you, not in a blaming way, but in a way we need to, and you need to understand, why are you relating to people and your own boundaries the way that you are? And trust me, you have a million really good reasons to be relating to your boundaries the way that you are right now.
Do you feel like, and I know part of you kind of went into it a little bit, but when it comes to people who find themselves being more people pleasers, do you see that attachment with childhood? Because I feel like me as a child going through a very chaotic environment, and my mother, who was always very dependent on me to regulate her emotions, I never really knew who I was going to get. If I was going to get the calm mom, or if I was going to get raging mom, if I was going to get pulled by my hair through the bathroom, or if everything was going to be great and we were going to go shopping. I didn't know what that was going to look like from day in and day out. So as I was navigating dating and relationships, I found myself more anxiously attached. I found myself always wanting to please the other person because I wanted to be accepted. So I always associated people pleasers more with kind of like that background, but I would love to hear your take on maybe why some people have people pleasing tendencies and how they can start navigating maybe doing the opposite or trying to have more assertiveness when it comes to their boundaries.
There's so many reasons why we end up as people pleasers. So having that sporadic, that not knowing what you're going to get, you probably have your intuition, your antennas like go to Mars. Like, you know, every person in every friggin' room that you walk into.
Yep.
You literally can walk into a room and be like, that person's violent over there sitting 4 rows away from me.
Yep.
Like, we build these sort of special skills to try to keep us safe in childhood. And I find that with the empaths, and I'm such an empath, and I know you are as well, that there's reasons why we're empathic. And so much of the time in childhood, there was a hypervigilance that you're describing. You needed to be on high alert to be like, am I ducking? Am I shopping? I'm not sure, but I'm looking, because it's like always feeling like there could be danger around the corner. But what does it do? That dials us into other people's emotions, because as kids, if that parent was enraged for whatever the reason and they were abusive, you were now unsafe. Something was going to happen to you. So we bring that, of course, into our adult relationships. But you also do it I was the hero child in my family system, and there was not physical abuse in my family system, more emotional neglect from my father. Like, I had all of my own experiences. But because I was the hero child, I was very dialed into succeeding, making sure that I was the one thing that everyone could agree on, right? That I was amazing. Like, that was the one thing. But of course, every family system role comes with its own cost to the person, right? Any role that we're playing, obviously, we're not being fully authentically ourselves, because we're doing it to please other people, which again goes back to exactly what you said about the people pleasing. So part of it is, I think one thing that people can do, if you identify as a people pleaser, as someone where it's difficult for you to say no, or to say something if someone says something rude to you or tells an off-color joke, like where you kind of just go along even though you are offended, but you don't say anything, that you have to think about how much of the time do you just automatically comply. You know, I talk about it in the book as like an insta yes, when other people ask you for things or to do something, and that's one place that we can stop, where if you can buy time, realize you don't owe anyone an immediate answer. And so I give you all kinds of scripts in the book, but I can give you a couple of now. Just make a decision right now, every person listening or watching, for a whole week. There is no saying yes to anything immediately. Give yourself a chance to think. And the way that you can put yourself in a good position is if someone says, hey, we're having a party next Saturday and we want you to come. You can say, hey, thanks for thinking of me. We can always start with something positive, right? I need to check with my partner, look at my calendar, let you know, and I'll let you know by Thursday or whatever it is. So we can always start by, it doesn't have to be a hard no, right? We don't have to start with the hard no. We can move into saying maybe, even if you know it's a no. Because what ends up happening if you're a people pleaser is a lot of times we say yes to things. Oh, and then we just conveniently get a migraine the morning of, where we're just like, I cannot fucking deal. Like, I can't. Oh my God, no, I can't. Can't do it. Not going. Don't care. Like, but what I'm saying is there's the child in us that feels like we don't have a right to say no. And yet right now, I want to speak to the adult in every person, saying, of course you have a right to say no. And you don't even need a good reason. My clients will feel like they need to write an effing dissertation on why they're saying no. How about you just don't effing want to? And you may or may not want to say that to your friend about her dinner party, but that's a valid reason for not doing shit. It really is. And you need to acknowledge that within yourself. It's okay to say no. It is okay, and really a must if you want to be healthy, to prioritize how you feel, what you think, and what you want over all other people barring minor children, right? We're not talking about kids, right? Once you have kids, till they're 18, you have a pact
Right.
to prioritize what they need. You know, it doesn't mean you let a 7-year-old boss you around. It does mean though that if they need to be picked up from ballet, that you're going to pick them up, even though you feel like going to have a drink with your friend. You
Right.
know what I mean? So, but I think that this is a notion that people find hard to allow in their life, or to feel like it's okay. So I'm going to say it again. You have to think that what you feel, what you want, what you think is more important than what anyone else wants, thinks, feels. That doesn't mean we don't compromise in relationships. That doesn't mean we don't have compassion for those we love. That doesn't mean we do things sometimes that we don't want to do because our loved one really wants us to, or a partner is super into whatever the thing is that they're wanting us to do, like going to see classical music with my husband. Now, he loves it. I don't, but I really love him. And it really makes him happy. And so I find a way to get dressed up. We invite friends. We go to dinner. I do other things that make me be able to deal with 2 hours of not trying not to fall asleep. And that's just, that's a sacrifice that you make in relationships. But in that scenario, I don't tell my husband how I feel. And he never listens to my interviews, so he'll never know. Because why? Either I decide to compromise and do it because I really want him to be happy. And will it make him happy if I go begrudgingly? Of course not. So anyway, I just say that. I want to give context to what I'm saying, because what I find in my therapy practice and in my mastermind group and in my boundary courses and all my other courses is that women in particular feel selfish if I prioritize how I feel, what I want, and what I think over all others. Then aren't I self-absorbed, and aren't I a narcissist, and aren't I bad, and aren't I whatever? And the answer is no, you're not, because you can still make choices to compromise, but you have to know what you think, feel, and want. And so much of the time we've been raised to react to others rather than having the action come from us, right? You don't want to be a bit player in your life. You're the star. You're the writer. You're the director. This is your one and only amazing life this time around, even if you believe in reincarnation, right? We're live right now.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's not a million tomorrows to do this. There is a finite amount of time that you have on this planet. You got to live your life your way. Because in the end, what I've seen in my therapy practice, I've seen women coming into my practice in their 6th, 7th decade of life being like, I've done it all. Checked all the boxes, money in the bank, kids all went to Ivy League schools. I'm on all these boards. I go to Soul Cycle 3 times a week. I still kind of like my spouse. Like we travel. Why do I feel so empty? And I'm like, because nobody friggin' knows you. Because you built a life built on checking boxes that other people deemed the important boxes to check. You just wanted to go along to get along. The kids going to the right schools, money in the bank. What about you? What about your authentic self? Because here's the most tragic part of those stories is that if we never let anyone authentically know us, because we're saying yes when we want to say no, because we're avoiding conflict and sucking it up and taking one for the team over and over again, how can anyone authentically love us?
So true. And I really resonated when you talked about the selfishness, because when I started to have really solid boundaries with people around me, two things happened. I lost a lot of people in my life.
Mm-hmm.
I was met with people who did not know how to communicate, did not like conflict and would go ghost, which was very hurtful. And
Mhm.
I also felt a lot of guilt and shame that came along with having boundaries with people in my life, because I was so used to being that person who was always trying to please others, being that person that didn't want the conflict, being that person that wanted people to love me or like me, whether it was romantic or friendships.
Yeah.
So, how can somebody try to start navigating that guilt and shame that comes up? So, when they are starting to have boundaries, they're feeling the guilt, they're feeling the shame. Where do they start? How do they deal with those feelings?
Well, part of it is, I would say, question the guilt, question the shame. Like, if your best friend was doing what you're doing, would you think that she should be guilty or filled with shame? Or would you be like, go you,
Mm-hmm.
right on? So part of it is, I think that it's prudent to question it, to look at it and go, why am I feeling this way? Are these my feelings? Or are these habituated feelings? Right? It's like a neural pathway. It's very well worn, especially if you grew up in a family system that guilted and shamed you.
Yes.
But you know what my mother would tell you about guilt? It is, persistent guilt, right? I don't mean guilt. Listen, guilt if you do something wrong can be a very reparative emotion. I was mean to my husband. Guilt makes me go, I should apologize, or I should acknowledge that I acted like a jerk. I'm going to do that, right? So it isn't that guilt is bad, but perpetual guilt, an overabundance of guilt is what you're talking about and what we're talking about right now. And my mother, Terri Cole, would tell you that is a wasted emotion, that it doesn't do anything for you, but it keeps you small and it keeps your life small. It keeps you sort of on the safe side because we don't want people to see us. And when you think about shame, what does Brene Brown say about shame? Shame can only thrive in secrecy, right? That is the condition that shame thrives in. So talk, share, get a therapist, talk to a non-judgmental friend.
Mm-hmm.
Be mindful of who you're choosing to be vulnerable with, though. Be
Yes.
mindful, be discerning. Because here's the thing about your life. Not everyone should be on the VIP section of your life, you know? Meaning, at least according to me, the VIP section is people who have access to your most tender heart, right? The people who fill up your bucket and you fill up their bucket. And even if you love your sister, if she's judgmental as hell, she can sit in the mezzanine. Like, it's okay. You don't have to defriend her. You don't have to cut off contact with people. But just because you have a sister that you love, I'm not sure she should have unfettered access to your most tender heart if she is not emotionally trustworthy,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's our job to be discerning. Who gets close to us? Who gets to be in the VIP section of our one and only amazing life? And it shouldn't be people who feel entitled to be there, your third cousin once removed, right? Like whoever, even friends. Like, there's so many times in my young life, dude. I start my book talking about the fact that I was a bridesmaid 8 times in my 20s. And half of those times I should definitely have said no.
Mm-hmm.
And I should have been like, how could you be asking me to be in your wedding when you wouldn't even have been invited to a friggin' housewarming party if I had a house? Like, dude, you think I'm your closest friend?
Mm-hmm.
And you're number 584 on my list. Like, I don't get it. But it was too embarrassing for me to say no. I felt like it was like an honor.
Mm-hmm.
Who was I to say no? I should have said no, right? I got dialed into those other people's reality. That's how they saw me, but that was not true for me. And I was so resentful of all the money I spent and all the Vegas bullshit and all the things. I was like, why? I'm not even really close friends with this person.
Right.
So it has to be what you think that matters. And when you're an empath or a highly sensitive person, and those things are different but similar, and I know you probably talk about both, we get super dialed into other people's reality. we can just get like, it's like a vortex that sucks us in. You're like, how can I break up with this person? They're so madly in love with me. I feel so obligated. Like it would take me forever to get out of relationships when I was younger, because even though my feelings had changed a long time ago, I knew probably 2 years. I'm like, I should get out of here. I am not in love with this person. But the thought of hurting them, because I did love them, was so friggin' painful. I just stayed. And of course, that was always disastrous. Chris, that was disastrous, right? Like, so then how did I actually leave? Like in the middle of the night in my pajamas, like holding my pillow. Like, it was never a well-laid plan, because finally your soul is like, I just have to go right now. Like I must leave,
Yeah, relationships are tough, because I've also found some of the most difficult times in my journey when it came to my healing, boundary setting, was coming to the understanding, and I'm still figuring this out, coming to the understanding that not everybody is going to feel the way I feel. Not everybody is going to have the same boundaries as me, and not everyone's going to adhere to those boundaries, because here's what would happen. I would have someone close to me. I would say, "This is what I'm looking from you. I don't understand why we're not close, or I don't understand why I haven't met your parents, whether it was platonic or not." And I have found that there has been relationships when I laid out those boundaries that they completely changed, did not want to have a conversation, or really just showed me that we're not as close as I thought we were, or I put them on the pedal of idealization of who I thought they would be or who I wanted them to become. And when they didn't meet that standard, I ended up feeling disappointed or hurt. And so it was a very hard realization that I had to come to not only still respect my own boundaries, but also not take it personal if someone didn't step up to the plate that I wanted them to have. So when it comes to like dating and relationships, especially in those situations, what is your advice for those that are starting to uphold their boundaries? And second part of that question would be, when are boundaries too much, especially in the beginning?
Yeah. Well, let's start with, I'm going to go back to the situation. I just picked up on one that you said, where let's say you're dating someone for a while and they don't introduce you to their parents. And that's something that to you would signal that the relationship is going to the next level and you feel like that's where you guys are. I would reframe the way that I would approach that. So instead of going at it from, why haven't you done this? I would go at it from, hey, I'd like to make a simple request that you and I set up a time to go have lunch with your parents. We've been talking about it. I really want to meet them, and I want to know how you feel about that. So what we do by asserting our preferred outcome, right? We're asserting our boundary preference, is what I would call it, is that A, it puts the other person in a position to say what they really think. Maybe they will and maybe they won't, right? I can't say that they will, but I know that you owning what you want, you asking to get your need or your desire met, that is where your healing is, no matter what that other person does. Right? It's you being like, I got my own back. I'm going to do this no matter what. I tell this story in the book, quickly I'll share, that my father retired at 50, moved to Florida. I always had like a kind of distant relationship with him that I worked on for many years. And I said to my therapist when I was graduating grad school, I'm not inviting my father to my grad school graduation. And she was like, why not? And I said, because he hates New York City. He used to work here. And I know he won't come. So what's the point in inviting him? And she was like, well, do you want him to come? And I was like, yeah, like this is a big monumental accomplishment in my life. Yeah, I want him to be part of it, And she's like, okay, then I think you should ask him. And I said, even though I know he's going to say no, she's like, Terri, it's not about what he does. It's about what you do. You asserting yourself and letting him know that it matters to you, whether he come or not. that is where your healing is at. And I was like, oh God. So I went to visit him. It was like a once a year thing. And she's like, you have to invite him to your graduation before you leave, visiting him in Florida. I was like, oh my God. So of course it's like, he's literally taking me back to the airport. I still haven't done it. I was only there for 4 days, but still every day I'm like, today's the day, but I didn't do it because I was terrified. So he actually is driving me, and I just had to do it. I was like, I can't go back and tell Bev I didn't do it. I was like sweating from head to toe. It was just a nightmare. My face is beet red. And I was like, Dad. And he was like, yeah, Terri. And I was like, I have an extra ticket to NYU graduation at the end of May if you want to come. And he was like, oh, I really can't. That's what he says. And I was like, it's all right, Dad. Don't even worry about it. It's okay. And he's like, here comes the guilt, is what he said, which I thought was really funny. I was thinking, are you kidding? I haven't guilted you a day in my life. Mm-hmm. But I said, Dad, no guilt. I understand. It's a lot, and I understand. But here's the thing. You're my only father, and I just want you to know that you matter to me. Mom will be there. Kath will be there. All my people will be there, but none of them can replace you because you're my only dad. And he was like, okay. And that changed our relationship. Mm. And when I was leaving, like, he hugged me way longer than usual because he was a guy who had the emotional IQ of like a sneaker. Like, there's no way. He can't. He was like, mm-hmm. I do not know how to do this. And that was actually the last time I saw him, and he died 6 months later.
Oh, wow.
And I was so happy that I did it. And our relationship in those 6 months, though, really changed. She started just sending me cards out of nowhere being like, love, Dad. It was like, happy spring. I'm like, what? Who are you? What is happening? So sweet. And I never regretted doing it. And then I really understood what my therapist was saying about that. I changed. I believed that how I felt was important enough to share with him. And I also realized I'm not that fragile. I was kind of glad he wasn't there with my parents being divorced. And, like I wasn't on the day being like, gee, I wish he was here. I didn't wish he was there. I was happy he wasn't, but I was happy that I got to tell him how much he meant to me,
I love that. And it takes back your power, because I think oftentimes when we're, trying to deal with boundaries and, the shame and the guilt, it comes with a feeling of sometimes feeling powerless, because I know for me, I knew what I would want, but I just didn't know how to communicate it in a way where there wasn't a chance of me feeling rejected or abandoned, or what if this person runs away, or what if this person leaves me. But now, how I am at 37, with a lot of growth that I've done and a lot of growth to do, I now know that I'm so at peace with where I'm at, and I know exactly what my boundaries are. So I have no problem projecting those boundaries or asking for the things that I need. And what you do with that, I'm okay with, because I at least am solid with me. Now, what about for people who don't have much of a choice with their circumstances? So for example, we're dealing with narcissistic parents, narcissistic ex-spouses. Maybe we have children with them. How can we uphold boundaries in situations that we maybe don't want to be in, but we have to because of circumstances? I know that those are very different, parents versus spouse, but where would you start with that?
Well, first of all, I think that there's a lot more options than people think, and that you have to think outside the box. I mean, if you're in a relationship with a toxic parent that is debilitating to you, that is harming you, that is doing the same harm to you in adulthood that it did to you in childhood, step back. Step back. Go no contact. Like, it's okay. And that isn't the first thing I say to people, like, oh, you don't like what someone's saying? Cut them off. It isn't that. It's just that it's okay to go no contact if having an active relationship with a narcissistic parent is destroying your self-esteem, because that's what it does. Listen, if you were abducted by aliens, you know what? They'd find some other narcissistic supply. Someone else would take care of them. Something else. Think about it. If you disappeared off the planet right now, when we feel so like, oh my God, but it has to be me. I would say to my clients, but if you were abducted by aliens, you know what? It would effing be somebody else.
Yep. You are replaceable.
They would figure it out. So I say that. I know a lot of people don't want to do that. I understand. Let's talk about the co-parenting with an ex who's a narc. Limit your interaction. Become unprovocable. Use the gray rock method. Be super boring. Be super like, no matter how outrageous, annoying, offensive they're being, don't give it to them. Don't. So limit. You can say we are interacting email only. You can get a mediator involved if you need to. There's a book that someone that I coached many years ago wrote, and I think it's called Magic Words. And it's like how to manipulate a narcissist, basically, if you're co-parenting with them, by Lindsay Ellis. And I think that that's a lot of energy, but I think it's sound. The book is sound in understanding what is a narcissist seeking from you, right? And when you understand their backstory, you can manipulate the manipulator, but it's a shit ton of energy. And when you're raising kids, it might be worth it. Like this is a choice people have to make for themselves. I like the idea of limiting their contact, limiting their access to you. And you know that they're going to use the kids to try to get to you. But the more boring you are, the less you give them any emotion, right? Because what is narcissistic supply? It is your pain, your suffering, your crying, your frustration, your telling other people. All of that is narcissistic supply for them. So you want to starve that piece. So learn about how to be with a narcissist. It isn't just a badge to be like, wow, I'm co-parenting with a narcissist. I trust me, I pray for you because it is hard to do. But if you want to become empowered, become educated, because that is your greatest source of power, is understanding what you can do to limit how much they want to be around you, how much they want to interact with you. So get educated and think distance, right? Distance is good. You know who else has great stuff on narcissism? It's Dr. Z.
Oh yeah, Dr. Zuckerman. She's been on my show 3 times.
Oh my God, I love it. I just interviewed her as well. She's great.
Yeah, I love her. She's the best. Yeah.
So she's got great advice on,
I agree,
sort of what to do,
I agree. And you know what? I liked how you said, I actually agree with you on the manipulate the manipulator, how do you say, what's the word I'm looking for? Manipulate the manipulative person. We'll say
manipulator.
That. There you go. So I actually think that can work in certain circumstances because, as you said, there are certain things that a narcissist is looking for in terms of supply. And if you have no choice but to co-parent with somebody, I personally, this is different for everybody. I have found that there are certain ways to say things. There are certain things that they need. And I have found that I've had the best relationship and it's been the most stable when I know how to navigate that relationship. Let's just put it that way.
Well, you're feeding the ego. So there's some satisfaction. And one of the examples that Lindsay gives in her book is like, if you want the other parent to help the kid with their homework, it's like saying like, you are always so much better at math. And I feel like you can explain it better than I can, type of a thing. Because what this requires, though, is you sort of sucking up your own ego, realizing that it's for the greater good, hopefully, of your child, or hopefully of there being some kind of peace and stability for your kids, because that's really what you want, even if you're separated or divorced.
I agree. And I think that that's valid in even really highly toxic situations because, we've talked about this before on my show, that it's the term narcissist is very, very out there right now. And there are a lot of people who do have true NPD, but there are some people that just have really high narcissistic qualities. And the truth is, we'll never really know, because most narcissists don't go to therapy unless they're made to go to therapy, and they typically don't stay. So they're usually dodging out as soon as they can. So I love how you explain it, and just your nuggets of wisdom are absolutely phenomenal. For you, what advice would you give for anyone who's listening to this episode and they're like, okay, I want to start healing. I want to start really putting myself first, and I want to be on a journey of self-love, compassion, and having boundaries of others. What advice would you give to them? And is there any advice you would give to your younger self?
Well, for those listening, I would say you can do it. I mean, just start with the fact that I'm absolutely positive it's possible, no matter where you are starting this journey, for you to become fluent in the language of boundaries. I have no doubt. I've helped zillions of people at this point in my life, so I know you can do it. I think it's most practical to start with the resentment inventory and really sort of doing an inventory of the relationships in your life. Yes, who you're feeling resentment about, but also who's draining your energy. When you leave an interaction with someone, do you feel energized or do you feel exhausted? When your phone rings and it's that really needy person, how do you feel? Like this also reveals where you need boundaries. And I like to make an energetic hit list where the people who are the energy vampires in our life, that we just make a little list and we just decide that we're going to energetically separate from them some. And you'd be surprised at how that can shift an interaction before you say anything, is acknowledging within yourself what relationships are taking from me, and what relationships really nurture me and feed me, so that you can spend more time on the healthy relationships and spend less time, and give yourself permission to change your mind. Even if you're married, even if you've been friends with someone for 30 years, if that person is toxic, if you're miserable around that person, you don't have to have them in your life. You really don't. And I think that we get so dialed into our loyalty, and a lot of times, at least in my youth, I had misplaced loyalty to the wrong people, making all of these wrong assumptions that people were like me when they were not like me. So give yourself permission to change what you're doing and who the players are in your life, and know that it's possible. So that's what I would say to people listening. And advice to my younger self: fucking relax. It's all going to work out. Just relax. Like part of what I really would say to my younger self is, I want you to love the whole journey, the light and the dark. It's not just your peak happy moments that make your life. Your peak painful moments make your life too. And so let's get the wisdom from those experiences. Let's honor those experiences, because wanting to be always happy, or I was like what do we call it? Like hyper positive, in my early 20s for sure, where I was like, but it all works out for a reason, or like I couldn't stand anything to be wrong or bad. And I realized, like, you don't need to control so much. Relax, stay on your own side of the street and let the chips fall where they may. It's all going to work out, but you are not responsible for everybody's happiness. That's what I would tell my younger self.
I could literally listen to you all night long. I feel like between your voice and your beautiful blue eyes that I see, I'm like, I can literally just stare at you and just listen all day. I love it. You have such a soothing way of speaking, and just a beautiful aura and energy. Terri, I want people to find you, so please tell me what you're working on, where they can buy your book, and your boundaries. And mind you, you guys, I found Terri through Erin, who I was on her podcast, and Erin signed up for her boundary setting course. And I'm not like somebody who's big on courses, but I checked it out. This is something that you actually want to look into. So Terri, please tell them where they can find this and where they can contact you.
Excellent. So first of all, I have a gift for your audience, and it's
Ooh.
a whole thing on boundaries and codependency, because I know that this is something that people struggle with, because I sure as hell did. So you can get that at boundaryboss.me/diary of an empath, because that
Perfect.
would make sense. I am going to be launching the boundary course again live in May. So there's information for that. That'll be on my website. I think there'll be a wait list that people can get on for that. But I don't always do it live. So I'm doing it with simultaneously the paperback of Boundary Boss is coming out. And so we're going to be launching the course itself at the same time. People can find me at terricole.com. I hang out on Instagram most of the time, which I'm just at Terri Cole, which is TerriCole. What else? You can get the book and all of the bonuses still. People are like, why are you still giving away the bonuses? I'm like, because I want to.
Right.
Because I want people to have them. I made them for them. Anyway, you can get that at boundarybossbook.com.
Perfect. And I will link everything that you mentioned to make it easy for you guys. So if you are listening, and if you're watching on YouTube, you just need to go in the show notes, which is below. Click on the links that is interesting for you, and you can find Terri there. Terri, thank you so much for this conversation, for these nuggets of wisdom. We need more people like you. You are a light. So thank you for coming on the show.